One thing I hope no one's going to get mad at me for saying is that Blades were released with an offhand pistol. And that said pistol has a skill called Dragon's Roar that stores over time up to 6 ammo, which upon player pressing the button is released all at once in an explosion, hitting one time for each bullet spent. There are many ammunition skills, but not many that spend all the ammo they have upon singular button press. Besides Dragon's Roar and Artillery Slash, I could not find a single instance of another Guild Wars 2 skill that behaves in similar fashion. Of course, being non-sentient, illiterate, blind and mute, I could have missed something. So if you have the piece of knowledge I lack, remember that sharing is caring and it's commendable to care for the handicapped. Nonetheless, ammo dump skills are an interesting case from the cooldown management perspective, as they remain the rarest case out of all other cooldown varieties in the game. Standard skills, that's all which you press once and they go on cooldown, with no gimmicks attached, are, as the name suggests, standard, meaning plentiful. Regular ammo skills are similarly simple and quite easy to find. They again have the one use per one instance of cooldown, but they are allowed to store multiple uses, one for each time cooldown passes, up till a predetermined maximum number. And there are also mantras, which grant multiple charges of what acts like an ammunition skill to use for fully charging a skill that behaves entirely like a standard skill, even obeying a regular cooldown. Next to the last, there are resource skills, which most often have both resource cost and cooldown, be it short one, like burst skills or majority of revenants skills, or just the resource cost, with most recognizable examples being Thief's Weapon skills. And finally we have bundles such as Engineer's Kits, Fire Stones, etc., where equipping and unequipping the bundle usually doesn't have its own cooldown, because skills within the bundle have their own cooldowns. Circling back to the ammo dump skills, they're unique in the fashion of cooldown management, as they blur the line between an ammo skill and resource skill, as they build up charges over time and spend them all at once, like your typical resource skill does. So you could have imagined those skills as having their own resource bars and scaling with said resource, like Warrior's Call bursts do with Adrenaline. This, however, creates a power budget conundrum attached to the details of said skill's cooldown management. Throughout the skill's cooldown from certain point onward, it can be cast for a less powerful version of the original skill, meaning the design leaves with an additional limitation, as putting some form of a utility that could be abused when spammed could end up disastrous to the game's balance. That's how we got to know. Further going, ammo skills in general often have longer cooldowns than their closest equivalent in standard skills, as having multiple charges of an ability stored is already somewhat of a strong utility, even if that ability on its own isn't inherently powerful. Now attach the same logic to ammo dump skills, and you get an exaggerated example of the same issue. Dragon's Roar is a skill that does nothing but damage, its melee range, and its damage is constrained to small stationary area. It's essentially 100 blades with shorter animation. But to add insult to injury, its damage at full power isn't even exceptional for Warrior standards. Sure, you can stack modifiers and make it do a lot of damage on a Berserker, but you can make anything do a lot of damage on Berserker, so why go for the most inconvenient option? And inconvenient it is, because a skill with 30 seconds of total combined cooldown that has no utility other than a ham-fisted trait interaction, which by the way prevents it from scaling with quickness, also does the same damage as 6 dagger autos, where dagger is the power weapon with lowest damage autos in Warrior's entire arsenal. All I'm trying to say is that this is not worth 30 seconds of cooldown. But it's basically locked into said cooldown because, drumroll please, ammunition can be replenished. Because ammunition can be restored by different skills, it is rare for Dragon's Roar to actually have to run for its full cooldown, especially considering Gunslinger's cooldown is roughly half of Dragon's Roar cooldown and it restores half of its max ammo, making effective cooldown of Dragon's Roar the same as that of Gunslinger. Furthermore, Dragon's Roar can be cast, then reset with Gunstinger, and cast again, potentially 3 to 4 times with the use of tactical reloads, on top of its standard charge count. Now consider the carnage that would ensue if that skill was actually worth 30 seconds of cooldown it has. An example of similar but less a problem is Artillery Slash. It only gets 2 days at 2 stacks, and its damage at 2 charges is barely getting ahead of Blooming Fire, a spammable damage option that exists only to be spammed and has much better cooldown economy due to being a standard ammo skill. As you can see, there's a lot that can be said about Bladesworn and features that shipped with it, and unfortunately, well designed and executed isn't on that list. What remains is the sheer undisputable fact that ammo dump skills were not introduced after Bladesworn got around with them, and so our sample size is understandably too small to truly gauge something's general value based off of. Maybe if such skills were designed for a different class and with less focus on resets, there would be a different outcome. But the only example we have so far is just a mess with impossible to gauge power budget and heaps upon heaps of wasted potential. On the other hand, it is possible that this is just a failed experiment, and Arena realized early enough that the whole thing is a fluke and pulled the plug on the whole concept of ammo dump skills. I can respect that. I just have one humble plea. If so, don't leave your failed experiments cluttering up the game. Thank you, come again. Of course, a big sign of gratitude towards the generous supporters continuously considering my dubious quality content worth their money. You're all truly welcome. Crabface out.